The third night of protests underway in Charlotte, North Carolina after the fatal police shooting of Keith Lamont Scott. There's police video of the shooting. The family has seen it. The police chief says the public will not. Joining me now is two former federal prosecutors, senior legal analyst Laura Coates and senior legal analyst as well, Jeffrey Toobin. Laura, does it make sense to you that the police would not release the video? We talked to one former LAPD officer earlier who said essentially you don't want to do anything that's going to taint any witnesses.
I think that's pretty disingenuous. One of the reasons they don't want to release the footage is certainly they want to be able to ensure that they have all their bases covered to figure out if there was indeed a use of excessive force. But also the elephant in the room, Anderson, there is a law that's set to go in effect in North Carolina in a few days that would prevent the police from ever releasing footage without a court order. So it may be an instance of trying to bide their time in order to, one, put all their ducks in a row, and two, to have that law take effect.
Jeff, we've certainly seen cases where the video has told the whole story. I mean, in this case, the family says they now have more, having seen the video, they have more questions than but I think back to the other case where, you know, the police said one thing has happened and the video came out and that was shot by a bystander. It showed the guy running away and the officer shooting him and apparently looking like planting some sort of evidence.
Right, that's Chicago. I mean, Rahm Emanuel almost lost his entire mayoralty because the Chicago police did not release the video until after the election, when Rahm Emanuel was reelected. You know, the idea behind not releasing the video is that witnesses will see the video and then change their testimony to line up with the video. You know, that is sometimes the case, but there are countervailing reasons. It is not an ironclad rule that you never release a video. And I think here, where there were a limited number of witnesses around this shooting, presumably all of them have been spoken to already, and now there's a tremendous public interest in seeing what happened here, and it might serve to calm the community, to let people see that it was perhaps an ambiguous situation. But I just think when the public interest is so strong to see a video, the police should release it.
Laura, we now also have in Tulsa a situation where the police officer has been charged with manslaughter. Given what we know, does that seem reasonable to you?
You know, it does. Think about what is the big contrast between what's happening in Charlotte versus what's happening in Tulsa. Remember, Tulsa is this community that just a few months ago, they had a conviction of a volunteer deputy on a manslaughter charge for his use of a handgun as opposed to a taser. And manslaughter carries a penalty of at least 4 years. And the reason it's manslaughter versus homicide is because I think the prosecutor believes, as probably the community does, that this officer did not go out intending to commit a homicide, but in fact acted out of an unreasonable level of passion or an unreasonable level of fear that the other officers did not have because they chose a taser. So I think in that instance it's probably appropriate, but it's really important to note that there's a contrast between the peaceful protests in Tulsa because of the confidence you have in previously successful prosecutions of officers versus Charlotte, where you have a recent case where you had a hung jury for the death of an unarmed black man by an officer.
I think it's also true that Tulsa is just a lot more conservative community than Charlotte is. And it is a confident step on the part of the prosecutor to file these manslaughter charges so quickly. These cases are hard to make against police officers. You know, the question in this case is reasonableness. Did the officer behave reasonably? Juries are sympathetic to officers when they say they were in fear for their lives. Here we have a situation where the victim, was near a car, and it'll be an interesting question about whether the judge allows in evidence the fact that there was PCP, which is a drug that can make people erratic and violent, inside the car. Now, the officer had no way of knowing there was PCP in the car,
right.
But if the jury hears that may help the officer a great deal.
Well, we also don't know whether it was in his system, right, Jeff? And so we have a number of issues with that.
Right.
And, but it's true that officers do get a lot of deference from both the jury pool and the greater community. But remember that in Tulsa, one officer pulled a taser, one officer shot and killed. And so you have that reasonable officer standard obliterated.
Yeah. Laura Coates, it's great to have you on. Jeff Toobin always
you.
as well. Much more ahead when we continue. We're following those protests out of Charlotte. The latest developments from Charlotte. We're also going to hear from an attorney for the family of Keith Lamont Scott about what they saw in that video and the way they interpret it.